Let's embark on the Ark Republic to hear current news that's published. More than gossip and chatter, covering current affairs that matter. We talk issues with professional views, all keeping you in queue. We wanted a higher vibe for these days and times, to free the voices and minds, reporting the sign of the times, so all can build. Let's shine.
What up, wherever you are situated in the universe? I'm Dr. Kai Shivers, and we are here talking again. Sebastian, you are becoming quite the regular with Sebastian Prats. Welcome to Ark Republic News, where we talk about all news that matters to us, and hopefully it matters to you. Sebastian, what's going on?
Well, today I have a very interesting topic to talk about. It's not quite about any one midterm race, but perhaps even all of them, because it has to do with Hasan Piker, the ever more mainstream voice of the progressive left of the Democratic Party, but also a voice many within the Democratic Party do not want anywhere near it.
Okay, before you go into that, please let us know who Hassan. You had to tell me who Hassan Piker was. I had to go down the deep rabbit hole of Hassan Piker. So let us know who.
So Hasan Piker is a Twitch streamer. Twitch is normally a platform where people just play video games live for people to watch. And the reason viewers tune in is not unlike the reason people tune into podcasts, because they like what whoever is hosting has to say, maybe their personality, how they go about things. Now, what Hassan has done is over the past half decade or so, he's brought politics into it, and he's become more focused on political live streaming, which he, in a sense, kind of pioneered. And the key here is he started that during the pandemic. And because a lot of people, particularly Gen Z, were online, he's been building an audience for this entire time and focusing on elections. And after the October 7th attacks, he gained a lot of viewers because he was covering uh, Israel Palestine and speaking to people's values and people what people were seeing in a way that the mainstream just did not did not speak to a lot of young individuals, especially. And in 2024, he only doubled down on that with election coverage, being one of the content creators invited to the DNC. Now in 2025, 2026, he's become a more known figure. He was name dropped by Andrew Cuomo in one of the mayoral debates, and he's been brought to stump events for progressive candidates, definitely more in like the AOC, Bernie Sanders left flank of the Democratic Party. But this has also drawn the ire of the more moderate, more centrist part of the Democratic Party.
I also need to also embed a couple of facts that are important, because I think when we talk about these influencers, I really don't like that word, by the way. I think it's bullshit. But when we talk about these people who are identified as influencers, and particularly through these new mediums or of technology, it's often in this whole vein of the microchip class. Here we go. Of this narrative, these fake stories about how you have these people of modest means rise and ascend by way of their smarts and through tech. And like all of those who come before him, Hasan Piker is not some, person that's coming off the block and grinding and everything. He pops up. He is the nephew of the founder of the Young Turks. What is his name? I don't know how to pronounce it very well. Is it Saint Uyghur? How do you say that name?
Cenk Uyghur, I think.
Yeah. So so he's the nephew of the founder of the Young Turks, and he actually starts this platform of talking about political commentary while he was working at the Young Turks, TYT. So, and at the time he's coming, Young Turks was starting to give mainstream press, a lot of problems. And but to acknowledge they become an independent news media source, the way in which they broadcast it, it does create a lane and an avenue for a lot of people who do political commentary right now today. And much of it is because of they're going par for par for places like CNN. CNN was, this is like historical fact, it comes into the media news scene because it promised news 24 hours a day, which was something. I mean, I grew up, TVs went off at 10, 11 o'clock. You would see the white noise or something. So CNN was a novel idea of having this ongoing news. So then now T2IT is like, we're going to do this commentary about this ongoing news, but from a perspective that's not of the mainstream. So I wanted to add that in when we're talking about a Hasan Piker. He's definitely what is it? Is he in his? He's in his 30s, right?
Early 30s. I believe
Yeah.
he's 30. He's 34. Yeah.
Okay. And I remember, you know what I'm saying? I am a digital immigrant, as they say. That is a term. A digital immigrant is a term of somebody who came in, who technology emerged, or this type of technology, talking about internet and everything like that, emerged when we were growing up. You are a digital native, where you were born and technology was already popping. So Twitch, and the concept of it, when I was introduced to it by my nephew, who would watch people play these games, and I'm like, I don't understand. I don't understand what is the entertainment of you watching somebody play a game when you can just play the game by yourself. Hey, call me old school, but I just wanted to kind of put that in until we go into Hasan Piker, because I think he's a template that we must study to talk about other folk, in this
Yeah.
whole Piker, lineage. I'm using that word a lot these days.
Yeah, well, I think he's captured a very unique combination of people in his audience, because part of it is people who are very connected to politics, very much active, paying attention to every little thing that happens. And the reason he connects with them is though because these individuals also happen to be in the farther left of what they might identify as Democrats or independents, because they might not want to associate with the Democratic Party, but that's because they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard, they don't feel like the Democratic Party is there for them. And Hassan does speak to these people, and he is their political home, so to speak. On the other hand, he does capture the attention of young men who, completely opposite to the aforementioned example, are not as politically active, maybe not as interested in politics, but they're interested in what Hassan has to say. And I'd say part of that is, he is a very like ideal masculine individual. He's tall, he's muscular, he's handsome. They've said this on Fox News, which is
He's
it's an
white.
int
That's so that I saw him, y'all. He ain't my type. You know what I mean? Okay, go ahead.
yeah.
But he don't have to be. He doesn't have to be my type. But mind you, this is through a very specific thrust. You know what I mean? We always have to keep that in mind, especially when we're talking about technology, when we're talking about the news, when we're talking about perceptions of power and beauty. Okay, anyway, I go into my professor shit, but I'm listening.
Yeah. And the he speaks to these young men in a way that makes sense, is appealing because he's a Twitch streamer. He's gonna talk like a Twitch streamer. He's gonna tell off people in the ever active chat and things like that, which is normal. But I think one of the points that kind of gets lost in this is because while he's streaming, he has to pay attention to the live chat and multiple screens at the same time, and take all of that information and not only be able to understand what's happening all at the same time for hours and hours and hours on end, but also bring in new ideas, bring in what people want to hear and aren't hearing from the Democratic Party in large. Uh, but within that, there is also very much an intellectual individual, which maybe doesn't show during the streams because it's a lot, and that's not. People don't watch live streams for most of the time for intellectual discussion, but I think a very clear example that he is still an intellectual is he had an event in Yale the other day, and he was able to bring in a massive audience. People go to Yale for a really good education, and they wanted to hear what he had to say. They wanted to see him. And it's not just because he's an online celebrity, it's because he's someone who knows what he's talking about and can express himself in a very clear, lucid way. And we saw this when he went on Pod Save America the other day, too. He said, among other things, he wants the Democratic Party to treat him like a never Trump voter. Someone when he was, and this was when he was pushed on why he said if Gavin Newsom is the Democratic presidential nominee in 2028, he would vote for third party. And the reason he said he wants to be treated like a never Trump voter is because he wants his vote to feel valued, that it's not just a guaranteed vote blue no matter who. And because that way his opinions are treated, his opinions, as many of his followers, are treated with the seriousness that they carry. Now, I do have some room for disagreement there because, simply put, in 2016, the margin of victory for Donald Trump in the Rust Belt, which decided the election, was smaller than the amount of third party votes. So it simply put, there's a very simple, easy argument to make that Jill Stein specifically swelled the 2016 election. And as a result, we didn't see the kind of change that is touted as what voting third party will bring about. Granted, part of that can also be put at fault for the Democratic Party for not listening to that desire for a change. But ultimately, what I'm getting at here is that Hasan Piker is a very smart individual, and he's not given enough credit for that. And his viewers do see that because the way he synthesizes these ideas together not only speaks to them on a personal, moral level, it also speaks to them in a way which they're not seeing from anywhere else, which is how this rise to fame happens.
But that's what you were talking about several podcasts ago, that these people that are running for office, or these people taking these leadership positions or whatever capacity, have got to get used to communicating in a way that the younger folk understand. You said this to me when you were talking about, you were making your case to have this thing about Hasan Piker on the podcast. So I was like, who is he and why should I care, right? And you were like, no, you definitely should care, because not only is he talking about relevant issues, like he has entered into what I call the public discourse. So he's talking about politics, he's talking about policy, he's talking about geopolitics and things like that, but he's using, as you said, the gaming language, right? And so there is a certain type of language. I mean, and we're starting to see how this, I would call it, this hyper digital AI world bleeds into daily conversation, because now people are like, oh, I gotta download, right? People weren't saying that, 5, 6, 7 years ago or 10 years ago, that, them having a revelation is now called a download. So the fact that he's using gamification language while he's synthesizing these ideas, he's delivering it to a way that is chewable and accessible to the average gamer, right? And what reports have shown, a lot of the folk that are on these gaming platforms, whether it be you're watching it through Twitch or you're playing a sort of, are tapped out a lot of society, right? And where they are tapped in, are the, what was the other podcast? What was the podcast?
Pod Save America?
No, we were talking about in the other podcast about the specific type. No, we were just talking about how there was a guy. I was giving an example how there was this guy who was at somewhere public, and like these young boys came up to him and they were saying anti-racist stuff, and he was some kind of like YouTuber or whatever like that. But I also it also is note, you were saying that how Hasan Piker speaks at Yale, but Piker is a college graduate.
Yeah.
All right. We must emphasize all of that. We must demystify the microchip class as being these scrubby, individuals, who are in the basement, you know what I mean, or garage of their mother, and they, they're like losers with the big L, and they just come up by mastering technology. So he's very well trained in terms of media because of his uncle, right? And he's very well educated because a lot of people did not go to college, let alone graduate from college. So he's working with some chops. I'm not disregarding what he has to say and what he is saying. I always like to preface that. But what he definitely is doing is game like having this gamification of the politics and public discourse is brilliant, and it definitely is needed. What I would like to see, and maybe you can answer this if not now and later, is what is this looking like for individuals that don't look like him? Because even though he is of Turkish descent, he looks like, just an average white guy, in a lot of people's minds. And so, as the United States definitely becomes more of a cultural, ethnic, racial kaleidoscope, I am really interested to see who else does that, right? So you have a Piker, but then you will have like on the extreme version, you might have, what's this guy, Kai Cenat,
Yeah, yeah.
or which is right because he's on a lot, right? Or I'm just learning all these people. Is it show me some skills, show the
I show
skills?
speed.
Oh, I show speed. You see what I'm saying? Look, I sound like an old woman. I can't believe that. Right. I show speed. Right. So it's really kind of interesting who's placed on the pedestal or who decides what lane they occupy in this hyper broadcasting age, right? So you have Kai Cenat, right, who's on and he does like a lot of skits and a lot of
Mhm.
comedy and he brings on celebrities. And then you have the iShowSpeed, who really, really what he's doing with as of late in terms of traveling around the globe and embedding
Mhm.
himself in cultures. That's what we call anthropology. So he actually is changing. Yes, he is a participant observer in others. He's experiencing the culture in real time
Mhm.
and trying to totally embed himself. The difference is a traditional anthropologist would write notes or record somebody. He's streaming it live so people could see how he is immersing himself, right? So that's why I'm like, it's really interesting to see how we expand this and what this looks like. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think I hadn't thought about iShowSpeed as an anthropologist, but it actually makes perfect sense. Yeah. And when you mentioned him, I was thinking about how he did essentially a tour of the United States and really showed how much of a culturally diverse nation, how much of a geographically diverse nation it is. And not just diversity with race and culture, but just what America entails in at least the 48 contiguous states. And this is people watch him. He's one of the most famous streamers online, widely beloved. I would not characterize him as controversial at all. He's also a big meme, is the truth. He has a very he has a habit of being extremely expressive, which lends itself to being able to spread gifs of him. Uh, and this is not just relegated to the US either. He's done tours of East Asia, tours of Africa, South America, all sorts of places across the world. And I think that's a major good that he's done. Now, going back to Hasan Piker, I think what's happening with him in the Democratic Party is kind of emblematic of the direction the party wants to take. Because especially after 2024, there was this increasing consensus like we need to win back young men. We need to, and understanding that the voters that got Trump across the finish line were these largely disengaged, lower propensity voters. And these were the kind of voters that the Democratic Party needed to appeal to. As soon as they got someone who can do that, and possibly even a Democratic Joe Rogan, suddenly they don't like it. And they're saying a lot of very serious they're putting out a lot of serious things against Hassan Piker, calling him anti-Semitic, calling him racist, all sorts of very serious things. But for a lot of people in Gen Z, what they see in those allegations is more so the fear with the online age, where it's going to be what people who don't like you are going to do. They're going to take the worst things you ever said or did on the internet, no matter how long ago, and they're going to use it against you to paint you in the worst light possible. And the most famous or infamous, depending on who you ask, example of this with Hassan Piker is that in 2019, he did say on a live stream that America deserved 9/11. Now, I'm not here to justify that, but what I will say is that was almost a decade ago. And he said that was not a good thing to say. I mean, I don't have to explain why 9/11 was a bad thing and why all the innocents who died and who were killed and the innocents who were affected as in the aftermath of by things such as cancer even absolutely did not deserve that. But Hassan Piker has also advocated for a lot of very important, very fundamentally good things in to his audience. And that's not what's being put out there in the news. That's not what he's being tied to. I mentioned that Andrew Cuomo name dropped him in the mayoral debate. He name dropped him to associate Zohran Mamdani with the America Deserved 9/11 quote. Frankly, if you ask me, Andrew Cuomo was preying on Islamophobia by associating the first Muslim candidate for mayor to New York City with someone who he was trying to paint as this radical individual who was pro 9/11. The writing is on the wall there. That was co-opting one statement again from nearly a decade ago to try to smear a Muslim man as someone who would ever justify 9/11 while running for mayor of New York City. What's really unacceptable there is that kind of tactic, and Gen Z sees it for what it is because yeah, it keeps us up at night. A lot of us up at night. We've all said stupid things on the internet because we grew up with the internet. So a lot of us were kids when we were using it. And kids are known for a lot of things. Saying smart things isn't one of them. And that's why a lot of these smear campaigns and attacks against Hassan Piker haven't clicked with young people because we see him for who he is now and for what he says now. And I'm not saying that what he says now is all sunshine and rainbows, non-controversial. I've seen a number of things he said, which I think are completely unacceptable for me or and that I completely disagree with. But when we look for a this mythical Democratic Joe Rogan or the guy who appeals to young men, it is Hassan Piker. It is people like him who are going to shape the future of the Democratic Party. And a key point with electoral politics with this is
But let me say this
Mhm.
before you go on. I want to actually push back on when you say that what Hassan Piker said 10 years ago about 9/11 is not relevant today. Well, one, I remember 9/11 quite vividly. There were a lot of things, and actually, I worked for a congresswoman who questioned President Bush on the reasons for why he did or did not do what he did with 9/11. I haven't heard the whole. I need to hear. First thing is that I need to get access to hear the whole speech because
clip.
apparently I need to hear this whole thing so I could put it in better context. So what so I can understand what it is that he said. But the reason why this is important to note, see, it's really interesting because if he said something that was against like the Jews, he would never see the light of day. You know what I'm saying? Because they have this never forget. So people who usually, so I would say that, and that's one thing. And then the second thing is that why is it that some people are allowed to grow while others are not allowed to grow on the behaviors that they do? That is a question, that I put forward. I don't think to easily dismiss, well, that's something that he said 10 years ago. It doesn't hold a lot of water, especially when, I know people who have been holding on in some way, shape, or form to their beliefs or whatever it is, 50, 60, 70 years. That is not saying, but at the same time, that is not saying we're human. We've said things or had reasonings that were lackluster, for lack of a term, right? I'm not saying that, but how do we fairly and justly implement this culture of grace, growing, and understanding now? Because what I hear you're saying is that this was when he was younger. He was younger. He said things. He probably didn't have, whatever it was to whatever, wherever, or he might have just had a position at that time and he's moved away from the position, which I don't have any problems with. People change up all the time, but the culture in America, some people are dinged more than others and throughout their whole lives and are blacklisted for things that they say. whereas some people are given the pass. Right. So I need to point that out. I'm not saying for you to have an answer to it, but I just wanted to point that out. But you mentioning how there definitely is going to have to be something to take into consideration because you have lived your full lives on social media, the younger generation, is definitely something that we have to do. But like we said in the previous podcast, we talk about Swalwell. Are we going to codify some of these things? Or there's some things that we cannot and cannot do? So that's the slippery slope. All right, that I wanted to
Right.
just put forward.
I think when it comes to how we look at growth and how we ultimately look at how we navigate with very serious mistakes, like what Hassan Piker said about 9/11, because that's not the kind of thing where even if like I do want to clarify. I mentioned the 10 years thing because that's context that's rarely ever included when that quote is brought up. Much like the context that he has apologized for saying that. But I think when we look at this, part of it does really come down to using using your best judgment. I wouldn't blame anyone for not forgiving him for saying that ever, because this was a nationally traumatic event, and it was especially traumatic for people who were in New York City in the time, who were close to New York City. I mean, I think of my mother. I mean, she didn't live in New York City anymore at the time, but she had recently moved out. She had many friends of hers who lived there, and the way she talks about that day is harrowing. So when I hear that quote, I think about my mother and the weight of the emotion of that day that I see on her face the time she talks about it. And it is very serious to me. At the same time, it does also go back to that fear of Gen Z, because I myself have things that I've said on this podcast before that I've grown from. I have different beliefs from. I would look back at how I was, or like the kinds of things I was saying in our election night and post-election episodes. There are certainly stances that I held then that I don't hold anymore, perspectives that I've developed on. There was certainly on the election night episode, there was certainly a lot of hope in those eyes that was thoroughly snuffed out a few minutes after we finished recording. But my point is more so that we, while there are people who do stubbornly hold on to their beliefs for decades upon decades, especially with younger folk, and that I include people who are 34 like Hassan, there there needs to be some more grace with how we see their growth, because these people are young. I'm young. We can't be attached to our worst beliefs for our whole lives. And we saw that in going back to what we discussed in a different episode in Illinois, one of the congressional races, a very young candidate, Kat Abogazali. She's not much older than I am. But some comments from her were brought up from high school when she was a Republican. And she said she endorsed Marco Rubio for the 2016 presidential election. That was brought up without context that it was in 2016 in high school for her. Obviously, she's grown. If she's running as a Democrat for Congress with one of the most left-wing platforms that we've seen for a House race. So when we think about growth, I think I think we need to be looking at who we're talking about now, not who we're talking about when they were 10 years ago or whenever these comments were made. Because I think people are just better than they're made out to be by their worst moments, as they're often brought up in the internet. You muted.
Let me say this. Everything you said, I agree with. The human, I said things. Why did I call Nick Cannon corny? Okay, I said that on a podcast about 2, 3 weeks ago, and I'm like, why did I say? I'm still thinking about why did I call? Well, I still think he's corny. But anyway, but so it's a human experience to grow. and to evolve. Everything you said, I 100% agree with. This country and the history of this country, however, does not treat that as so, right? As a black person raised, we are raised with the idea that one decision can destroy your life. One mistake, one bad decision, or one healthy decision, be it an action, be it what it is you say, can change the direction of your life for the rest of your life. Because this country allows some people to grow and develop, or applauds when people grow and develops and comes out, or applauds people who say, ask for my forgiveness. But some people punish people for life. Hence, adolescents, 12 years old, being tried as adults. Hence people serving lifetime sentences for selling weed. So I need to point that out, because often this courtesy of saying, hey, you know what, you were young or you were human and we're going to provide you grace, is not always extended to everyone. And knowing that, I think that's always important to keep in context when we have these conversations about what people did 10 years ago. I think it is definitely very good practice. I'm still like, I like, people are giving Candace Owens a huge pass. I don't understand it. Okay, I don't understand it. Even though Candace Owens doesn't talk about that hip hop video she was in years ago, even though she would bash Black Americans, that's how she comes up. She ascends in this. Anyway, I deviated, but I just want to keep that in place. So, but I don't know what he said. I don't know what he said. They said something. He was talking about the empire and how America is an empire. But I need to get more into it. And for the record, I am not holding him hostage for what it is that he said. I just want you to know that. I just need to point that
Right.
out,
No, that's
because
fair. That's
when
fair.
my husband walks through Washington Square Park, right? Because you've seen him. Sometimes he comes to class, and I remember one day it was 4:20, and Washington Square Park was filled with majority white young folk smoking weed, thousands, in Washington Square Park, and he was like, when I was a youth. And if I smoked weed in this park, right, I would definitely get some time. I would get some time in jail, right? So so all of those people who went to jail under similar circumstances at Washington Square Park 20 years ago, right? But they don't. So I just want to just let you know, like, this is like the unevenness, that we have to deal with, and when talking about politics. But I think the Pikers of the world are really interesting in changing the dynamics of how we do
Yeah.
politics in this country, for good and for bad. You know, I really kind of worry about these young Doge bros that were being filmed right in their depositions, and how they erased or they determined what money was cut, who was fired, and so on and so forth. It sounded like they were playing a game. It sounded like they were playing a game. They were like, well, what did you know? Well, why did you do it? Because it had to be done. It was for, it's like you were about to, I don't, I'm not a gamer. Like,
It,
the last game I know very well is Donkey Kong. If you even know what Donkey Kong is.
of course I do.
Okay. Yeah. So it's like, bing, or whatever. So anyway, I was like, when you told me about the game thing, I said, it all makes sense. These Elon Musk Doge Bros were gamers. They had to be. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to give some credit to just the entire community of gamers online.
No, I'm not gamers. I am not shitting on the gamers at all. Like, in no way, shape, or form. There's a lot of like different gamers, and I'm saying like
Yeah.
gamers are like, in a musty room, scratching their balls. You know what I'm saying? Not taking a shower. Like, that's what I'm
Yeah,
not saying.
those
I'm
have
not
a
saying. I'm not saying.
reputation
But
already.
there is a culture. But there is a
Yeah.
culture that we have to acknowledge, and I know it spans. I talked to gamers. I like did this whole thing on gamers and anime and people and we had like a comic. I get it. Okay, let me be quiet.
Yeah.
Give your credit to your to your peoples. Are you a
Yeah.
gamer?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see.
I
I didn't know.
yeah, I've always loved video games. I grew up with them. Uh but yeah, it's a very wide spanning community online, certainly. And you have subsects with pretty much any kind of ideological culture you can
Mhm,
imagine. Some of them certainly are louder than
mhm,
others.
mhm.
Like the Doge folks, those they certainly had a field day with a lot of
Right.
essential government programs, no more than a year ago. Uh, but at the same time, I just really want to emphasize for a lot of people, games bring people together. That's for a lot of people, it's not just one video game, it's a community around it. It can be an event when a new one
Mhm,
releases. It's something really special. And for a lot of people, there's a reason there's big communities of this online and big subsects of culture. And I do want to touch on a separate point about something you said and what I was going to say earlier as well, with reshaping politics
mhm,
in the US.
mhm, mhm,
Uh, there are 25 states. Trump won 3 consecutive times. The only one there which is close to competitive consistently is North Carolina.
mhm,
What this means for is that for there to be reasonably be a Democratic governing majority in both chambers is there has to be a change in how the Democratic Party communicates, how what the coalition looks like. Because right now, even if it is a coalition that can win and can lose as well as it did in 2024,
mhm.
it isn't enough to reliably take the Senate. And of course, we're starting to see that now with candidates running in much more Republican pro-Trump states such as Mary Peltola in Alaska, Sherrod Brown in Ohio,
Mhm.
James Talarico in Texas. But at the end of the day, there needs to be a new vision and a vision that includes a broader coalition because if any one of these purple seats falls, that can set the party back decades in the Senate. And we see the consequences of these things every day. The Senate majority, which would be infinitely more reasonable for Democrats to get if we hadn't lost in Pennsylvania in 2024. At the same time, we wouldn't be talking about a Senate majority if we had lost very close races in Wisconsin or Michigan, or if we had lost races in 2022, in 2020. And this also means future presidential candidates. Barack Obama was like a sudden star in Illinois and suddenly the entire nation in 2004. John Ossoff is someone I think is a very underrated presidential contender.
That's true.
That
That's a
was,
good point. Out of Georgia. Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
that was a razor thin victory unseating an incumbent because it was just enough of a it just big enough of a coalition with in 2020 with Biden that he was able to flip Georgia and be part of the process that helped John Ossoff win that Senate race. These are simply put, elections matter. And going back to Hassan, people may not like him in the Democratic Party. A lot of people outside of it do. And that's something that has to be treated with the weight of it, all that it entails, because right now the Senate is very, very difficult for Democrats to gain reliable control of. And that's not even getting into things like just the John Fetterman factor. One thing is a Senate majority for Democrats, another is a Fetterman-proof majority. Those are two very different things, things that could decide things like the Supreme Court, things like any appointee to Trump's cabinet, if they continue to be fired, to resign as they have now and as they did in his first term. And I really cannot emphasize enough to people, especially to people who are more apprehensive or just do not like Hasan Piker, that don't need to like him. but to throw him out and to undermine the power that he has in social media is squandering a very key resource in being able to secure a governing majority.
So is Piker, would you say he's an independent, or
I
he just talks about, well, like, what's his lean?
I would s- I would characterize him as an independent the way Bernie Sanders is an independent.
Mm-hmm.
It helps that they share a lot of the same values.
Mm-hmm.
But it's this kind of brand of left-wing politics where you don't subscribe to the Democratic Party without question. You support a lot of individuals within the party, but you want to see broader institutional change before you simply declare yourself a member. Now that's how I see it. I do not know for certain if he has specifically stated he is independent or he is a Democrat. But he certainly works within some party circles. I mean, again, he was part of the content creators invited to the DNC in 2024. Uh, yeah, that's how I would characterize it.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'll be looking forward. I know we're trying to keep these, to at a certain time. So before we wrap up, I am looking forward to knowing more about other people who are in this gamification political space that you talk about. And very interesting. I could go on and on, but we're going to stop right here. And I'm going to stop with a thank you so much again for your insight and bringing the issues from your lens and your community that are so relevant and important to talk about right now.
Of course, I always appreciate your grace, the opportunity, and of course the audience's time. Neither of us would be able to do this if it wasn't for their grace and their support.
That's right. So thank you so very much. And I'll be talking to you later.